All right, pricing. So stressful for so many people, but it really doesn't have to be. I think pricing is really fun, honestly. I think it's great. Here's what goes into your prices. Let's start with the basics. So if you're running a small business of photography, art, whatever. I use photography as my example, but all my videos really apply to any artist that wants to run a small business, whether it's you're selling soaps at a holiday show, craft show, or whatever you're doing. So here's what goes into pricing. These are the basics. You have 3 factors that go into every price. 1 is your cost of doing business. 2 is your cost of goods sold. And 3 is your income/profit. And I use a /profit for a reason, and I'll get into that in a second. So let's run through the 3 pieces of your pricing puzzle. Okay, cost of doing business. You might see it online in some Facebook groups or whatever of CODB. That's the acronym for cost of doing business. And everyone needs to run their own cost of doing business. That's vital. What that entails is a million different things. It's all your overhead, basically, is what cost of doing business is. It's insurance, taxes, just tons of stuff that goes into that. Your phone bill, your internet, your website expenses, advertising expenses. The list goes on for days when you really start to flush that out and think about it. So let's take a second and write down CODB, cost of doing business, on your piece of paper. Hopefully you have a piece of paper while you're watching this. And flush out what are your overarching expenses for the business. Website maintenance and hosting fees, software for your computers, webinars, like if you're paying to do a workshop or a webinar, like one of mine, that's a cost of doing business. When you first start, you need to go get a DBA, a doing business as. That's just usually your first year, but that's still a cost of doing business. I include my health insurance, my 401k, all of my auto expenses like a car payment, gas, tolls, that sort of stuff. I include all of that as my cost of running the business. There's a lot that goes into it, right? So sit down and flush all that out, figure out what your monthly expenses are, and if it's a yearly expense, divide that by 12 to get your monthly number, okay? So that's your cost of doing business. Just set that aside for a second. We'll come back to it. The second piece of the puzzle is your cost of goods sold, COGS. COGS is what you would see if your accountant writes it out or something. Your cost of goods sold is the actual cost of the item, okay? The problem with the way most photographers and artists price things is you think, well, that thing I got for free, or oh, I work at a place and I got this stuff for free, or I can do this for free. Well, how do you multiply free? You really need to sit down and figure out what it is you're selling that's tangible and flush out what you would actually have to pay for that item if you had to pay for it. So that's one way. Like if you're getting free, let's say you do decorative wine bottles and that's what you're selling and you're getting all the wine bottles for free. But imagine if you actually had to buy those in bulk. Like Google that, figure out what your warehouse pricing of buying wine bottles is. So for example, I'm a wedding photographer and I offer wedding albums. That's my jam. So I have the wedding album itself, physically getting that from the manufacturer is one cost of the goods sold. But guess what? There's a lot more that goes into it than that. That's also part of the COGS. I have packaging, I have shipping, both from the lab or the manufacturer to me and also from me to my client. With my wedding albums, I give out the digital files when we're finished with the album. So I have the cost of the jump drive that their wedding photos go on is actually built into my album price and not my wedding price. Then there's time. There's client meetings. There's emailing back and forth to get that design done. There's sample albums. So with a wedding album, I need new sample albums all the time because my customers want to see new cover types. They want to see new companies. Maybe I just need more samples of like different wedding locations. Somebody has to pay for that. I figure out kind of how many samples do I order in a year? Usually maybe one. I'm pretty good about not buying too many. Divide that by how many weddings albums I'm doing. And so a small piece of the pie goes to each wedding album so that I can afford sample albums. And that's the same for a lot of things. I also do vendor books or vendor gifts with album, when I'm done with the wedding. So I'll budget that in there as well. Because once the design is done, it's easy to maybe pare it down a little and then send a copy to the vendor or the wedding location. So I want to budget in, maybe once a year I'll do that for a great location that I love. So your cost of goods sold is a lot of different things. It's postage, like we talked about with shipping, packaging, the actual item itself. There's also the time it takes. Like, what if I had to pay a designer to design it? Or even if I paid an office manager to do that, I still need to put a dollar amount on those things. Like, how much do I want to get paid myself per hour of doing that work? So time-wise, you need to think about how much time does it take to design the book? How much time does it take to sell the book? So there's like a 2-hour client meeting. How much time does it take to have another client meeting on the other end to show them the design, get their approvals, make changes? And then another piece of the time on that is time editing those photos. So if there's 120 images that go into a wedding album, I have to edit those images, and therefore I need to pay myself an hourly rate to do that. Then there's also maybe retouching fees, or there's other little costs like that. So this is where every time you do a product, keep track of how long it takes you to do it. If this was your job for somebody else, what would you get paid per hour? Generally speaking, if it's just like emailing stuff, maybe like $15 an hour. But if it's retouching or editing or something like that, that you should be paid a decent rate of what a real designer or a real retoucher would charge. And that's maybe $35 to $50 an hour. So you kind of figure that out. And then there's a sales aspect too. So how much would you pay a salesperson in a commission or whatever? So there's all these little things that go into your cost of goods sold. And most photographers make the mistake of, say, this album costs X amount of dollars, I'll just multiply it by 3 and it's plenty. But I would recommend you multiply it by minimum of 4, maybe 5 or 6, and then maybe multiply it again. It's rare that you'll charge extra ever in your career. Almost always you're not charging enough. There's only one time in my entire career that I actually overcharged for something because I was basing it off of a really old idea of what it might cost me, but the client paid it, so that's the price for that item now. So whatever, And that was sort of an accident because it used to cost what I budgeted for on the top of my head, but there were newer options that were cheaper. But that's rare. At one time out of 15 years have I overcharged somebody. So I really recommend you really just sit down and do that math and be realistic about what all goes into it, okay? So that's your cost of goods sold, and that's piece 2. So we have the cost of running the business itself. Then we have cost of the actual item you're selling. And then a third piece, which is kind of 3 and 4 pieces, is income/profit. And the reason it's jumbled together because it's called, well, your accountant will call it owner compensation plus profit. Owner compensation is your actual pay that you're getting. Some of that is benefits that you pay yourself, like retirement, health insurance, things like that could come out of it. There's a lot of stuff that goes into that, but generally it's your take-home pay. But the reason it's /profit is profit goes back into the business for building your business. So that's a chunk of change out of your own paycheck that needs to be reinvested into your business. And general rule of thumb is 10% of your income gets reinvested in new camera gear, new computers, things like that. Educational workshops and conventions typically would go into cost of doing business, and you just budget for it like you'd budget for anything else. So if you're running your fingers correctly and you're paying attention to these 3 different buckets, and then you put all 3 of those things into pricing your products, then you can flush out your price list. Does that make sense? So you've got cost of doing business, you've got your cost of that good sold, and you've got your income and profit. So when you're flushing out that wedding album I was explaining earlier, you don't want to go on just the COGS that I talked about. You don't want to go on just the cost of goods sold, even though you're accounting for time and things like that. You also have to budget into that album price your cost of running the business and your income. which that's where all small businesses fail. They just take, okay, this album cost me X amount of dollars and I'll just triple it. But that you actually need to triple it as far as the cost and then add the other two pieces of the puzzle, which are your profit and also your cost of running the business. And we haven't even talked about taxes. So you see where it goes? It becomes this whole thing. So taxes are a whole other ball of wax. Taxes, I mean, if you live in the US, straight off the top, 15% off the gross sales, off the top, goes straight to the government. Self-employed tax. And then you break it down and it goes further. And taxes is a whole other video. But that all comes out of it. And it comes out of not just your gross sales, which is before your cost of doing the business and before your cost of goods sold, but then you also have to pay tax on your income too. So you get taxed twice. You get taxed just off the top, and then you get taxed on what you take home. So yeah, if you write off all these business expenses and you go out to a couple conventions or workshops or whatever, you can write that stuff off and it brings down your actual income, but you still have to pay taxes off the top. It's a lot of reasons why photographers are never making any money and they're struggling, is that it's so easy to undersell and undercharge and not run a profitable business, especially if you have another job paying for those things. Because for you, an extra $1,000 a week is a huge windfall. But for me, I absolutely cannot live my entire life plus my business on $1,000 a week. That just, I can't. I don't have anyone paying health insurance. I don't have a company paying for things. I don't get a regular paycheck. I don't have a spouse paying for stuff. So if you're going to quit your job, you have to plan for all that stuff. And it's better to do it earlier. And then if you don't think you need the money and you're like, oh, I'm just trying to buy extra groceries, or I just want like a college fund for my kids or whatever. My thought to that is then charge the going rate, because then you'll get there faster. You'll be able to afford those braces for your kid, no problem. But if you're doing $100 jobs a week, $1,000 jobs a month, I totally get it. That feels like a windfall when you have a full-time job or a spouse paying for things, but you could get there so much faster if you charge the going rate. And here's the psychology of it too. If you're not, and I'm assuming that you're interested in doing that because you're even watching this video, but here, I'll just get this off my chest. The problem with not thinking that through when it's a side hustle is it makes that transition for you harder when you want to go full-time. And then if you want to go big time, your whole past client base is not going to come with you because you were underselling for so long. Those were your clients. But the minute you want to go for real, you can't really, some of them will come with you, but you're going to lose, and it depends on how low you were starting out, but you're going to lose a lot of those people as you go. So all that momentum and energy and referral base you've built up isn't going to translate, and it will not come with you. And that's a problem. You basically have to start from scratch, and then that's when you get into marketing and advertising and all this other stuff. So it's yet again another reason why I'm always an advocate for, even if you're starting out earlier and younger and newer and whatever, charge the going rate. The second reason that not only will it take you longer to get where you want to go, but also you're bringing the rest of the industry down, because now my clients know that there's people out there that will do mini session days for $100 and give out the digital files. So they don't call me anymore. And their photos are terrible. I see these photos on Facebook because I'm friends with my clients on Facebook. But I get it. I get that my clients want to do that because it's cheap and it's easy and they get the files and they don't really care. But it's really painful for me to see. And also, like, sometimes I see some of these photos and the photos are not even worth $100. Like, they're terrible. And if you're not that good of a photographer yet, don't charge any money. Do it for free until you are a good photographer. There's 0 other businesses in the world that go in and do everything for cheap or free to build demand. There are 0 other businesses that do that. If a new Subway sandwich shop goes into your neighborhood, they're not giving out free sandwiches for two years to build business. And then trying to charge $6 for a sub. Right? They're not doing it. Why are you doing it? So my thing is charge the going rate. And if you're not ready and you don't have the confidence is a whole other thing, because that's just your own issue. And you're not really qualified to decide if you're good or not anyway. So let's set confidence aside for a second and just talk about the craft. Let's just say that there's a baseline that like everybody's meeting to like deliver photos and get a good skin tone and like can take the picture and show up and whatever. Then do it for free until you can get to that point. Literally do it for free. And then when you're ready to start charging, charge the right price. And the right price is after you've done your cost of doing your business and you bundle that into all your clients, you figure out, and then your cost of goods sold, and then your profit and income. Okay? So how does that all tie together? That's probably your big question. So how that ties together is every single product that you offer, and that includes digital files, needs to account for each piece of that puzzle. The cost of goods sold, the cost of doing business, and your profit, income. Right? Does that make sense? Hopefully, leave me a comment if it doesn't. Let me know, shoot me an email. So that's the thing, is even if you're giving out digital files, it's not free. You still have to cover your cost of doing business and your income, and maybe your COGS is very low on that because you're just emailing them. But you're still paying for a service to email it, right? So that's software that needs to go into like Dropbox or your web gallery, Pixie Set or something. Those costs need to go in your cost of doing business. So it's a rabbit hole once you get into it, but it's imperative that you do those three numbers. And just to like end this video really quickly, the standard benchmark for a profitable photo studio, if you work out of your house, is 25% of your sales is the costs of goods sold, and 30% of your sales is your cost of doing the business, your overhead, and then the remaining 45% is your income and profit. And I say mark 10% of the profit to go back into the business, either in a savings account that's separate or whatever. That way you have money for gear upgrades and computer upgrades and all that jazz. So that's it. That's the basics on how to price your photography business. And if you want more, obviously I'm a mentor and I love mentoring people. That's what all this gibberish is behind me. I just mentored someone this morning and helped them flush out their price list. Love to help you get your shit straight, pardon my language, but it's fun for me to flush it out, and it's fun for me to find products that are perfect for you. And more importantly, I have some webinars that are coming up down the pike for more pricing, album sales, that sort of jazz, and I'd love it if you sign up for those. And I have some freebie, so if you're interested in one of my upcoming webinars, please make sure you're on my email list, and I will make sure you find that information out. Until then, I do Feisty Photographer Fridays on my YouTube channel, so you can subscribe for those. And let me know what your struggle is. I'd love to help you out.